Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Alaikum salam.
How are you, sir?
Fine. How are you, Mr. Nazrul?
Yes, fine, sir. Now in Bangladesh, 4 p.m.
You sorry?
Our local time, 4 p.m. now in Bangladesh.
Oh, 4 p.m. Okay.
Good evening, bro.
Hi. Good
Thank you,
evening.
sir.
How are you?
Hi. Good.
Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And a very good evening to everyone.
Good evening, bro.
Good evening.
Welcome back. I apologize for the last minute notice, and I thank everyone for their cooperation in agreeing to postpone the class. So we had our week break to get settled, and for those who are celebrating Ramadan, a sort of week to get adjusted to the new schedule. So let me start just by going over the sort of schedule for tonight with the new timing of everything. So what we'll do is we'll jump right into the presentation, the article presentation. We won't have our discussion to start the class tonight, but we will then we will break at around 7:10, 7:15, right before Buka Puasa. Okay, and then we'll give the Muslim students, well, I give everybody, of course, but the Muslim students a little bit more extra time to have their Buka Puasa and do their Maghrib prayers. So would 7:45 be acceptable? Would that be enough time for everyone? If you need a few more minutes, that's fine. You just come back when you're ready, but we'll try to do around 7:15-ish, a little, maybe a few minutes before that, to 7:45. Okay, and then we'll come back and finish up the class. Okay, I hope that's okay with everyone. Let me just take us back, put us back up to let's put your blast for a second. Okay, can everybody see my screen there?
Yes, bro.
Yes, we
Yes.
can see.
All right, so just a reminder for next week, your assignment 2 is due. That's the problem statement assignment. And hopefully I plan to look through the examples together with you tonight after the break, just to sort of look at some of the content and some of the characteristics of the problem statement. And maybe have, if there's any questions, I can field questions as well. But I noticed 11 of you have already submitted, so that's great. You're ahead of the game, so to speak. Okay, so that's good that some students have already submitted. Now, I just want to remind everyone, because we have quite a few students in the class taking the class for audit. Okay, so these assignments are only for the elective and compulsory students. All right. If you're taking the class, obviously for sit-in, you don't do the assignments. If you're taking the class for audit, I'm only expecting you to sit for the final exam. Okay, so I hope that's clear for all the audit students in the class. Okay, you are not required to do the assignments. You only have to sit for the final exam. Okay, so just so that's clear to everyone. And then also I received a notice today from our faculty that the mid-semester course evaluation is open already. So anytime between now and week 6, which is, I forgot the date, but it's up until next week, essentially, you can fill in the midterm course evaluation. Okay, so that's through Putra Blast. You can find that on your, I think it's on the Putra Blast home screen, if I'm not mistaken. You can find that. I can't access it because it's only for the students, but it should be there on the home screen. Okay, and then tonight we will continue with our discussion on the traditions, the qualitative research traditions. So last class, we did the overview of the 5 traditions. And of course, we went through them rather quickly, so there wasn't a lot of in-depth kind of discussion. And unfortunately, I can't spend a whole 5 weeks talking about the traditions. There's other topics that have to be covered. But I wanted to at least go into more depth on at least one of the traditions. And the one I chose is phenomenology. And the reason being is that phenomenology is in many ways a sort of summation of qualitative research. If you understand phenomenology, in a lot of ways, you understand qualitative research in general, because phenomenology, as we mentioned in the last class, is not only a research design, it's also a philosophy. Right? And the philosophy of phenomenology really sort of conveys what qualitative research is all about. So the article tonight is a very nice methods article that really walks us through the phenomenological approach in the context of an actual study. So it's a combination of reporting on a study and also the author's commentary on how to do that type of study, the phenomenological study. So it's a very nice sort of tutorial article. And for those of you who are, I mean, for anybody in the class really, because you can really apply the concepts, I think, to pretty much any kind of qualitative research, but especially for those of you who are planning on doing phenomenology, it's a really nice article, a sort of how-to article to conduct a phenomenological study. All right, so looking forward to seeing the presentation on that tonight. And then after the break, inshallah, we'll do our, as I mentioned, we'll go through the problem statements a little bit together, just to look at those together and some of the characteristics of those. And then if there's time, I also wanted to go through the example abstracts. I didn't do that last class. I was supposed to do that. The example abstracts of the 5 different qualitative traditions, just to give you a flavor of the differences between them through actual studies. And that's the purpose of that exercise. So I think that's a good illustration. It'll help you to get a better understanding, a better feel for how the 5 traditions differ. Okay. So hopefully we'll have time for that. Are there any questions before I start? Before we let our presenters take over? Anyone have any questions or problems?
Prof.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Ajwa?
I'm on group 7, week 7 presentation.
Okay.
Before this, week 7 is before mid-sem break. So
Okay.
I just want to clarify.
Yeah, just push it
Do
back.
we have our mid-sem break
Yeah, we're gonna have our mid-sem
after
break.
mid-sem break?
Yeah.
Also
Just
after
push,
mid-sem break
yeah,
is
just
week
push
7.
everything back a week. And we're gonna add
right.
the missed class, we'll add it at the end of the semester.
Like
Okay.
final study week.
Yeah,
All
study
right.
week. So just so
Thank you, Prof.
basically we're pretending now that we're in week 4, even though it's technically week 5.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's important to clarify that. Any other questions or concerns? No? Okay, so are our presenters ready to go?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so go ahead. I think you can share your screen and we can get started, since there's no other questions from the students. So I want everybody to put on your phenomenology hat tonight. Okay, so I want us to start thinking like phenomenologists, right? Again, I hope that you had a chance to read the article and prepare for the lecture. It's always good to be prepared. Okay, so who's uploading the slides, or who's sharing their screen?
Me.
Oh,
Yep.
okay, Faida. Are you having a problem?
No, wait.
Ah, there it goes.
Okay, do you see my screen?
Sure, you can just put it into slideshow mode at the bottom there. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Looks good.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good evening to Professor Latif and all my friends. Okay, today I will present the summarization of the article, the Phenomenology Research Design Illustrated with one other members, Muazzah Shifa. Okay, this is the outline of our presentation today. For my part, okay, for the introduction, meaning of the phenomenology research, research paradigm, research informants, and then last but not least, research procedures to get the agreement. Okay, for the for the introduction. Okay, the purpose of this study is the researcher to want to give the in-depth information about about this phenomenology research more detail. So and then one more purpose is to give the clearly how to implement the design in the research study based on the experience by the informants with the index explanation. Okay, in this paper, the researcher get the information based on the informants' experience, and then the researcher also doing the research regarding the teaching and learning practices. Okay, it is because the researcher always found the misunderstanding and poor practices based on the past literature review, uh, based on the researcher reading, and then as a researcher also this researcher also suggests the researcher want to do the study need to know about the method that they choose so that they can doing the research in the good practice. Okay, this is several definition based on the researcher in this article. Okay, first is the phenomenology method is to understanding the social and psychological phenomena. Uh, and then other than that, the researcher also said that this method to identify the phenomena more detailed and more specific, such as if the researcher want to share any information about the culture or some celebration about something celebration in some place. So this is the suitable method to use. Other than that, to describe as accurate as possible the phenomena restraining from the pre-given framework. And then in this study also, the researcher mentioned the phenomenological research also concerned with the life experience of the people that they want to know. Last but not least, it is will give an effect to the experience perception based on their perspective and challenging of their structure or normative assumption. Okay,
Okay,
next is the
can you go back, Faida, to that? That's important. So this is the definition of phenomenology. Is that what you mean here by definition?
yeah, this definition is based on the article.
Based on the what? Sorry? On
Based
the
on this
article.
article. The
Well,
article.
I know it's based on the article. I mean, it's the section on definition of phenomenology. Is that right?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right. So yeah, so what she's touching on here is Grunwald, the author's description of the phenomenological design and the definition of it. So I'll just elaborate on some of these points you made here. The idea of phenomenology being to understand social and psychological phenomena. But what's very unique and interesting about phenomenology is their understanding of reality. Phenomenologists consider reality to be, in the words of the author, and I'm going to read what he wrote here. realities as they present themselves to people's consciousness. Okay, in other words, when you experience something, okay, how you are processing that within your conscious is reality to a phenomenologist. Okay, and they call that the pure phenomena, right? And so to them, that is the only notion of reality that really exists. Okay, this idea that objects exist in the external world independently does not really come into play in phenomenology. In other words, it has to appear to an individual, a person's consciousness for it to be considered reality. And that is what they study. So however somebody experiences something, however they perceive it in their mind, in their conscious, and then how they experience that, how they process it in their mind, that is to them reality, and that is what they study. And that is why it's called phenomenology. It's based on what they call the pure phenomena as it's experienced by individuals. Okay, so you have to really understand that when you do your research in phenomenology, that is your understanding of reality. Okay, and that is why you're doing that kind of a study. That is why you're choosing this as your approach, as your research design. All right. So there's no idea like, oh, well, they experience it this way, but in reality, it's like this. For example, well, UPM is a good university, but there's some students that had a very, really, really bad experience. Okay, no. What you're studying is you're studying a group of people, and you're studying their experience and how it is portrayed in their conscious as reality. And so that is what you're trying to understand and report. Okay, so that is really the essence of phenomenology, and we have to really understand that. And if you're going to do phenomenology, you have to really understand that. Okay, that's the perspective that you're coming from. Okay, the lived experience is the phenomena. The phenomena is reality, right? At its basic understanding. Okay, so I just want to elaborate on that. It's really important that we understand that that's clear. Okay.
Prof?
Yeah.
Prof. Maizura here. Prof,
Yeah,
I just have one question, a very short one. It states here, experience and perception based on their own perspective. Their own perspective means, is it the respondent perspective or the researcher's perspective, Prof?
The respondent's perspective.
Okay, thank you, Prof.
Yeah. And in fact, that's one of the issues that we're going to see in phenomenology is the different ways that the two major schools of phenomenology, essentially the transcendental phenomenology and the hermeneutic phenomenology, that's one of the ways that they differ in that in the article tonight, he's coming from the perspective of the Husserl or the transcendental phenomenological school, which is phenomenology as description, okay? Describing reality, describing the phenomena as it's experienced by your participants. So here, that's what they're talking about the experience and the perception based on the subject of the study's perception or perspective. Okay, thanks, Maizura, for the question. Okay, Faida, you can continue.
All right.
Prof, can I ask a question, Prof?
Yes,
Is there any difference between lived experience and life history, Prof?
Life history can be studied outside of an individual's experience, actually. You can use documents to study life history. You can use other forms of data that don't speak directly to life, to lived experience. So life history is broader. It's more encompassing than just lived experience. And life history is usually, you can do a study on a life history study that focuses only on lived experience, but of course it would be retrospective. It would look at different time frames, usually chronologically and stuff like that. So yeah, I would say life history can be defined as being broader than lived experience. Because in phenomenology, your only concern is the people that are having that experience, right? There's no such thing as sort of like secondhand data in phenomenology. Like I wouldn't ask Radzia about Najwa's experience, like in a phenomenological study. I would never do that because I want to know how each of you experiences that phenomena, right? But in a life history study, I can go and ask Radzia, I can go and ask your colleagues, I can go and talk to your family members, right? I can read your, maybe some papers you've written or some kind of work you've done. That can all be considered data in a life history study. Okay, so they're not quite the same.
Prof, sorry,
Yeah.
Maizura again.
Okay.
Prof, I was just looking at hearing Najwa's question just now on life history. Can I just assume that life history is more on biography or narrative?
Yeah, very similar. Yes, life history tends to be more narrative in its approach.
Thank you, Prof.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for the questions. Good. Next, Faida, you can continue.
All right. So in this article, also the researcher also explained about the what is the paradigm is all about. So this is the definition of the paradigm also. So the paradigm is the patterning of the thinking of the person. So so in this phenomenology, so the pattern of this person, the researcher will take the informants experience in the group, not the individual. This is different with the narrative. Okay, in this article also, the researcher also use the epistemology method. It is the literally theory of knowledge which serves to decide how and what is the social phenomena that will be studied. So it is the important process to us to know, to identify what and how the issue or gap will be that we will be studied on. Okay, this other than that, in the study also, the researcher also formulate the epistemology as based on 2 points. The data are contained within the perspective of people are involved with the cooperative education program, and then the researcher get a good rapport with the participant and informers to collecting the data. This is important because the data is fully get from the experience of from the informer itself. Other than that, this research also to understand the meaning of the natural endowment of person, a specific attitude based on the belief sustained success depend on the acquiring and the returning talents. Okay, in this article, the researcher mentioned the talents in terms of key employee who are characterized by the extra strategic mind, leadership ability, good communication skill, ability to draw and inspire people, and then having the entrepreneurial instinct, processing the relevant functional skill and able to deliver the result. Okay, this is the process of this study. Okay, the researchers start with the selection of this topic, problem or area of the interest. So meaning that the researcher identify first what he or she want to search about, and then the researcher also using the epistemology method that I just explained just now, how and what the issues is all about. And then the researcher also identified to use the method. This is the phenomenological methodology. It is because the researcher want to get the information or the nature about the phenomenological research, but based on the informer's experience. Okay, and then the researcher also choosing the informants that have an experience from who have been done their research based on using this methodology. And then this part I will explain after this. And then after this, after the choosing the informants, the researcher collect the data based on their experience and knowledge from the research participants. And then last but not least, the data storage and data analysis. Okay, these two process will be explained one of our members, Muazzah Shifa, after this.
Okay, can you just stop there for a second? So epistemology is not a method, Faida. You wrote epistemology method. Epistemology is not a method. What is epistemology? Who in the class would like to share? What is epistemology?
It's a
Epistemology is
research paradigm.
Sorry, I was asking the class members. Sorry?
It's a research paradigm.
Research paradigm. Okay. Anyone else?
What is the nature of the relationship between the known or would be known? I think
Okay.
got 5 example: positivism, post-positivism, critical theory, constructivism, and participatory. It's a
Okay.
part of research paradigm.
Yeah, those are research paradigms. Epistemology is a part of the research paradigm. Remember the 3 core terms: ontology, epistemology, and methodology. All right, so the paradigm is made up of those 3. So epistemology is how we know what we know. So the theory of knowledge, right? What is knowledge? What is knowledge, and what is the relationship between the knower and the known? Okay, and so here, before you get to phenomenology, you have to state your epistemology. In other words, what is your theory of knowledge? What is knowledge? How can we know what we know? And so that's why in the article he says, he stated his epistemological position regarding his own study. Okay, and he says the data are contained within the perspectives of the people that are involved with the cooperative education programs, which is the topic of his study. And then B, because of this, he engaged with the participants in collecting the data. Okay, so I think I used the example earlier in the semester about, is it okay to go have lunch with your participants after your interview, right? Joking around, but that idea that engagement, close engagement with the participants is how we acquire the knowledge in our study, right? They can acquire the data, access the data, develop, generate the data. So this is the related to the epistemology, our theory of knowledge and how we arrive at knowledge. Okay, so epistemology is not a method; it is really a philosophy and a position. It's a position, and from that position, then you, of course, you choose your methodology, and that's why in your diagram, Faida, which is correct, you have epistemology and then phenomenology. You have epistemology and then methodology, which is correct. Okay, which is the right order. Okay, so just be clear about that. Okay, next slide, Faida.
okay. This is how the researchers get the informants of this study for this study. Okay, this study, the researcher use the purposive sampling. It is to identify the primary participants. So the researcher use the 3 steps to get the suitable informants of the to get the information about this study. Okay, first is the researcher search and using telephonic inquiry to the office of the academic vice principal. So this study, the researcher doing the study in higher education in the Gauteng, South Africa. So that's why so the informants maybe most of them maybe use the phenomenological method in their study. And then the researcher also use the snowball sampling. This it is the method of expanding the sample by asking one informer or participant to recommend others for interview. So meaning that the researcher get the one informants from the telephonic inquiry, and then this researcher asks the informants for to get the others informants to get the information more. And then last but not least, call those through whom entry in gatekeepers and those persons who are volunteers, assistant, key actors or key insiders. So okay, this is the procedures that the researcher used to get the agreement and develop a good rapport with the informants. So the first is the informants explain clearly to the informants about the purpose of the study, what is the purpose of the study, and then the procedure of the study, what is the process of, and other than that, from A to Z, and then the risk of the benefit of the study, okay, the nature of the volunteer participants, and then last but not least, the procedures that use to be protect the confidentiality and trustworthiness. Okay, this last point will be explained by our presenter after this.
Okay, can you stop there?
Okay,
So can you, okay. Can you go back to the previous slide? So like most qualitative research studies, this was a propositive sampling approach that he used, okay, to conduct the study, all right? And he gives us sort of an overview of his method that he went about to get his participants, study participants, all right? He used a snowball sampling approach, which I'm sure all of you know about. It's probably the most commonly used approach in qualitative research, okay? And then he dealt with gatekeepers. So who are gatekeepers? What's a gatekeeper? Do you remember from your basic qualitative research class?
It could be the ministry, it could be the principal of the schools.
Yeah, in the field of education, yes, yeah. In fact, it's both, Mr. Hanizan. In Malaysia, when you want to do educational research, you have to go through several gatekeepers. In fact, the Ministry of Education, the State Ministry of Education, and the principals is usually the way that we get approval to do studies in schools. So it's quite an extensive process. And so those are the gatekeepers. And then even once you're in the schools, you have to deal with counseling teachers and sometimes other teachers, depending on whether you're studying students or teachers or whatever. So there's quite a few gatekeepers when it comes to studying education in Malaysia. Okay, but in general, gatekeepers are anybody that you need to go through to get access to your sample. Okay, so anybody that might act as a sort of barrier to you accessing your data. Right, and so you always have to plan for the fact that there's going to be always some kind of gatekeeper, usually, not always, but usually there's going to be some kind of gatekeeper that you have to deal with to get access to your data. All right, so that's important to keep in mind, and that's pretty much true of all qualitative research studies. Okay, next, the next slide. Right, could you just fast forward? Yeah. Okay, so here he mentions about his ethical steps, procedures that he took, right? Disclosing the content of the study, the purpose of the study, procedures, etc. Right. So this is sort of just generic information about how to go about conducting research. Okay, and the ethical requirements of doing that. Just if there's anything. Yeah. So he lists those down in the article. Again, that's just a good reminder for us of what needs to be involved. And the informed consent form, in fact, I've posted an example consent form in that blog, my old class blog that I shared with you, I think in the previous class. there's in that blog, there's an example. There's a sample consent form that you can download if you want, and you can just change the wording for your own study if you'd like to use it. It's an example. And so typically we use consent forms when we do qualitative interviews with study participants. All right. Who can tell me what is the purpose of the consent form? Anybody know?
To protect client and also researcher from any bad consequences.
Yeah, exactly. It is. It's to protect both the researcher and the research participant. Yeah. So I mean, it's funny because in most Western countries, people expect it because it's sort of like a legal procedure that is common in those places. In Malaysia, sometimes though, people have an adverse reaction when you present them with a consent form. Oftentimes, it's seen as something that's very intimidating, and it makes them feel kind of, I guess, maybe suspicious, or they feel like they're under scrutiny of some kind. Like it's a very yeah, there's just that reaction often. So you need to really explain it to them, the purpose of it, how it works, why they have to do it. Okay, so it really needs to be explained. Okay, so sometimes you'll face that barrier. Okay, shall we continue?
Prof.
Yeah.
Prof.
Yeah.
What difference between research participants and informants, or is there's no any difference?
Yeah, good question. It's a good question. This is jargon. The issue of jargon in qualitative research can be problematic for a lot of people. We use a lot of words that have very similar meanings, and I think I mentioned this earlier in the semester, but you have to be careful of jargon. So I like to use the term participants because research subjects, it's the same thing, but research subjects often has the connotation of experimental studies. So in qualitative research, you'll often find them use informants, participants, sometimes respondents, although even respondents tends to be equated with like survey research more often. Because when you do qualitative research, you don't really have respondents. People are not responding to your survey. They are in a process of co-creating data really through your interaction with them. And again, this actually does have to do with epistemology. The data is generated through the interaction between the researcher and the person, the person that you're involving. So they're not just responding to questions on a piece of paper. They are actually engaged with you in generating information and data and so forth. So some qualitative researchers are very critical of the use of the term subjects or respondents. So I just like to use the word participants, but it's the same thing. Okay, don't get me wrong. So just be aware. Be aware of these different language issues. Okay, so it's important to know that. They're different vocabularies for different research methods. That's all it is. Really.
Thank you, bro.
Okay, Shaya. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, bro.
Yes, Adnan.
Yes, there is one question, Prof, regarding the purposeful sampling. As we know that there are different or various purposeful sampling.
Yeah.
One of these is, we call that criterion sampling, okay, and snowballing sampling. If I'm intending, for example, to interview some students or teachers who have different criteria as well. So could I mention, for example, I will implement 2 types of sampling, purposeful sampling. First of all, I'm going to apply the criterion by setting some criteria. Relying on that criteria, I'm going to implement, for example, the purposeful sampling. So because that I don't know, the particular participants that I'm going to interview. So I'll use the purposeful sampling or snowballing sampling to ask others to tell me who are, for example, have such criteria.
Yeah, you sort of answered your own question there, actually, because whenever you use purposive sampling, it's by definition, by default, it's criterion sampling, because to purposefully select a respondent, there's the assumption that you're selecting them based on some criteria. Okay, So in qualitative research, we usually don't refer to it as criterion sampling. That's usually what they use in quantitative studies when they want to use criteria as their basis. We just usually refer to it as purposive sampling, because within that, it's the assumption that it's purposive, therefore it's based on some criteria. In other words, how else can it be purposive? It's not based on a criteria. Where's the purpose? What's the purpose for choosing these people? It has to be based on a criteria. Okay, so you don't really need to confuse yourself with that. You can just mention either using snowball sampling. Snowballing is a method for getting people, for getting participants, right? And obviously you're going to snowball based on a criteria as well. You're not just going to snowball, get anybody. You know, you want certain, if you're studying experienced teachers in school, you want teachers who are experienced in school. Those are criteria, right? So you want teachers who have at least 20 years experience or something, and, you know, they're teaching in secondary level, and those are all criteria. Right, so you don't need to really overdo it with the you know, with those labels, as long as you mention it's purposive, and then you give some idea of the criteria that you're using, okay, to identify your participants, right? And then, are you using snowballing? Are you, you know, hanging flyers to recruit participants? Are you using social media to recruit participants? That's more of just how you recruit them, okay?
Okay, thank you, Prof. Clear.
Okay, sure. Okay, any other questions? So we're on to our next presenter.
Prof, can I ask question?
Yeah, go ahead. Who's that?
Oh, Wafi want to ask first?
Oh, Wafi and Razia.
Okay, I go first.
Okay, Wafi first.
Okay, Wafi first.
Prof, can I, regarding to constant form, can I say it's about something like permission? Am I right?
Sorry, Wafi, it's hard to hear you. You're a little bit low.
Consent form.
Yeah, consent form.
Can I say it's something like permission form?
Sort of. Yeah, sort of. Yeah, they are giving consent. Yes, they're giving permission or consent to do the interview, to join the study, and to be a participant in your study, in your interview. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
But it is really a protection, though, because they're having cases where researchers either purposely or accidentally they release information about the participant publicly, or and then that the consent form gives the study participant some legal recourse in case you do something unethical. Okay, so it is actually very important for them. Of course, in our kind of studies, the social sciences, we don't get too many cases like that, in all honesty. But it depends. If you're doing a very sensitive topic, sometimes word gets out, and it's very embarrassing for people. So it's good to do it. It's good practice if you can do it. If you follow the, and now we have to go through ethical protocols with our university, the JKE, Jawatan Kuasa Etika. So we have our JKE at UPM. We have the ethical committee. We have to get our study approved. The ethics committee has to approve it, and they will look for your consent form. You have to have that to get ethical approval to conduct your research, right? And most journals, if they're good journals, they will require that as well. The fact that assurance that you used those consent forms. Okay, so it is important, and I would really do the best you can to do it, even though sometimes people are a little bit funny about it, but just have to explain it to them. Okay, Razia, you're up. You're next.
Yeah, I'm here. Okay, can Fayada open the slide before sampling the chart?
This one?
Yes, this one. Okay, Prof. Here start with the selection of the topic and problem of the area of interest, right? And then after this, we go to the epistemology. Means we have to deal with the theory of our nature of knowledge. Because do we need to find the theoretical gap first, or maybe we have to select the topic first for the problem statement, and then before we define we want to use the phenomenology or case study, or maybe because that one means we have to focus on the epistemology method. Then epistemology deals with the theory. Then when we deals with the theory, we have to find other the variables relate for the theory. So means we have to find the theoretical gap first, right? Is it correct, Prof? Before we find
Well,
the problem statement, is it something like that? We
no,
have to find the theoretical.
yeah, the process that she has outlined here is the correct process, because there's no point in studying a topic or a problem if you know you first have to really identify what is the topic, what is the problem within that topic, because it may not be, even though, say for example, you really want to do a qualitative study, but if you on a certain topic, but if you go to the literature, you find that there's really nothing there that's worth studying. All right, so you're not going to just do a study for the sake of it. You have to show that there's really a problem there to study. So it makes sense to do it this way. Identify the problem. Then, but if usually you have choices, like usually you have choices in how you want to study a problem or an issue. And so here, I think the point is that you first choose your topic, and then based on your theory of knowledge, your epistemology, then you choose, for example, you choose to do a qualitative study, in this case, phenomenology. It makes sense in that order. It does make sense in that order, I'm not sure if I really answered your question, but I think that was the question.
Prof, is it an important thing for PhD level to find the theoretical gap?
Well, a theoretical gap, theoretical gap is often convoluted with knowledge gap, because when you in a particular area, as long as you're contributing to new knowledge, there's most likely going to be some theoretical contribution, as long as you are starting with a theoretical framework. You have a clear theoretical framework, right? And so the findings from that study are going to extend theory in that way by, maybe you're studying in a new perspective, in a new context. Maybe you've discovered some cultural variable or something, or maybe you found that the existing framework doesn't work in this context. All of those are contributions to theory, theoretical development, theoretical extension, and so forth. So, don't think of them as completely two different things. Contribution to knowledge and contribution to theory. Theory is knowledge. Theories are based on knowledge, so they don't have to be completely separate from each other. We'll discuss this more when we get to the topic on the role of theory in qualitative research. We'll discuss this in more depth.
Okay, Prof. Thank you.
Right. And it's also easier to discuss based on specific examples. Like, we're just talking about it conceptually. It's really hard to but if you look at actual studies, and that's what we'll do with that lecture on the use of theory in qualitative research. We actually look at examples and how they use examples, how they do it in actual studies. It's much easier to see. Okay, next presenter.
Okay, I pass this one to Kak Muazzah.
Okay, Kak Muazzah, are you there?
Okay.
Muazzah Sifa, are you there?
Kejap, All right.
Oh, there she is.
Hello everyone. Okay. Now it's my turn.
Taking over from Faida.
Okay, it's my turn. Okay, I want to present about a phenomenological research design illustrated about data gathering method, data storing method, explicitation of data, explicitation process of the data, and validity and truthfulness. Okay, next. So first, next, Faida.
Wait now. Hang. It's hang.
It's hanging. This is like me today in my Facebook Live session. I had bad problems with the PowerPoint. Go ahead, try again. Don't worry.
Okay.
Oh, there it goes.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay. Okay, in the data gathering method, the researcher used unstructured in-depth phenomenological interview. The questions were directed to the participant experience, feelings, belief, and conviction about the theme in question. The data we obtained about how the participant thinks and feel in the most direct ways. In this article, researcher asking the participants or informants to set aside their experience about the collaborative educational programs and to share their reflection on its value. And the researcher in this article also, the researcher focused on what goes on within the participant and got the participant to describe the life experience in a language as free from the construct of the intellects and society as possible.
Okay, so you can see there. Sorry, Martha, sorry. So you can see there the nature of the questions that are asked in a phenomenological study are very much to the theme of in-depth research. You know, asking people to reflect on their feelings, their thoughts, their opinions, their values, and so forth. Because again, how that individual views this particular phenomena from the level of consciousness. In other words, however they see it, and however they're experiencing it, that's reality. Okay, and so that's why we can see here that he talks about experiences, feelings, and beliefs, and so forth. All right. In the article itself, he also mentions about the question. I don't know if maybe you're going to talk about this. I shouldn't say it. I'll let you go. Go ahead, Maza. You can continue, and I don't want to steal your thunder. So
Next, data story method. In this article, the researcher used two types of data: interview and field notes. And how they managed to interview audio record with permission. Each interview was assigned a code, and different interviews were identified by an alphabet character, and listen, recording, and make notes, transcribe keywords, phrase, and statement. And the researcher used field note. The field note have four types: observation notes, what's happened note; theoretical notes, attempt to derive meaning; methodological notes, reminder, instruction, or critique; and analytical notes, summary or progress review. The type of data based on this article, what the researcher used. So this is how to the researcher manage their field notes. Use the code, the label, you attach to a phrase or other short sequence of the text you are analyzing. Category, a grouping you impose of the coded segment in order to reduce the number of different pieces of data in your analysis. And theme, a high level or categorization is usually used to identify patterns across the data set and findings. Once you identify your themes, you will present and interpret your finding as the result of your research. This is what the researcher used in this article. Okay, next.
Okay, so this is, sorry, so can you go back? So this is elaboration on analysis?
Yes.
Okay. Why are you laughing? You're not sure?
Sure. And this is what I read at the article. Then I summary. So this is from the article. I think it's right.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot more in the article. So I really recommend everyone go and read the article because he goes into a lot of great detail about how he actually conducted the interviews, right? And he talks a lot about for example, the questions he asked. It's very interesting if you look at the way that he posed his questions in his interview, because he really only asked two core questions. Okay, so he says here, the central research question was, what is the contribution that cooperative education can make in the growing of talent of the South African people? All right, and then his two main interview questions were, how did you experience the joint educational venture? And the second one was, what value, if any, has been derived from the collaborative effort? Okay, and so those are the two main interview questions. And he mentions he used an unstructured in-depth interview approach, okay, which is why he only had two main questions. All right, so that may seem kind of strange to people. We know from, for example, if you look at semi-structured interviews, which is the norm in qualitative research, usually there is an interview guide that contains maybe 8 to 10 questions or 12 questions. In this case, he used a very unstructured approach with just 2 main questions. And then from there, it's just a matter of probing, right? Probing for their experiences, probing for their beliefs, and their views on that topic, okay? Okay, so we can continue, go ahead.
Okay, next slide. Okay, next, the explicitation of the data. Explicitation is the process or fact of becoming explicit or of causing to be explicit or that which makes something explicit. Explicitation is an investigation of the constituents of a phenomenon while keeping the context of the world. Coffee and Exton 1996 regard analysis as the systematic procedure to identify essential feature and relationship. Investigation of the constituent of a phenomenon while keeping terulang pula yang bawah ni. Okay, kita kata of the world. Okay, next find out. Okay, explicitation process.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Okay, explicitation process has a 5-step. First, breaking and phenomenological reduction. 2, delineating units of meaning. Next, clustering of unit of meaning to form themes. 4, summarizing each interview, validating it and where necessary modify it. And extracting general and unique theme from all the interview and making a composite summary. This is an explicitation process by the researcher in this article. Okay,
so
next,
so he doesn't use the term data analysis in the article. He uses the term explicitation, and that's unique to phenomenology. And what he's talking about there is breaking down the phenomena into parts so that it can be sort of assessed and analyzed and so forth. But they try to avoid the use of the word analysis. Okay, so what he's talking about here is really data analysis, but he calls it as explicitation. All right. And he breaks it down to 5 steps as the presenters have shown here. Okay. Are you going to explain these 5 steps, Moaza? No, not part of your presentation. Is it part of your presentation to explain the 5 steps? No.
No, just process 5 steps. I just give 5 steps. No expectation more. The expectation more.
All right. So this is the process that they use. So again, it is a sort of form of coding and categorizing and thematizing, but they don't use those terminologies.
The same thing, Prof.
Well, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's a similar process. Okay.
Yes, similar process. Okay.
So bracketing is the key here with phenomenology. Bracket is the researcher, the analyst bracketing out your own presuppositions about the data. So you really look at the data at surface level, and you don't try to read into the data. Okay, this is a very descriptive approach. Okay, and then from there, identifying which units of the data are meaningful to the phenomenon, the most meaningful to the phenomenon, and taking those out. Okay, and then sort of clustering those back together to form sort of meaning units or themes. All right, and then once that's done, then you have to go and put back those meaning meaning units or those themes into a narrative that explains and describes the composite story of all the participants of the study. Okay, and this is very unique about phenomenology. They end up with a descriptive statement about the phenomenon as experienced by the sample as a whole. Okay, so they sort of deconstruct everything, and then they sort of put it back into a sort of story at the end. It's a descriptive story about the phenomenon. Basically, so you're basically retelling the audience what is the phenomenon all about as it's experienced by this group of people. Okay, and so that's really what these 5 steps are really trying to show. Okay, next.
Okay. Okay, and the last, validity and truthfulness. In this research, the researcher use truthfulness. Okay,
Truth value.
string and
It's called truth value, not truthfulness. Truth value. Yeah.
String and forgetful emphasize the truth value of qualitative research and list a number of means to achieve truth. This is a validity, and the phenomenological research design contribute toward truth. This is a truthfulness, and the audio recording made of each interview and the transcription of the interview feature contribute to the truth. And subject, after the researcher record the interview, use audio recording, the subject receive a copy of the text to validate that if reflected their perspective regarding the phenomenon, what that was studied.
Okay. So here, truth value refers to what? Does anybody know what they're referring to here? When they keep using this word truth. In the article, he does too. What is meant here? Anyone?
Is it reality, Prof?
Yeah, it's there because again, to phenomenologists, reality is what you're trying to capture, and that reality is truth for these people, for this group, right? So it's how authentically can you capture the truthfulness of their experience, all right? And so how authentic and how rigorous is your study in doing that? Okay, and that's really what they're getting at here. All right, and then they, like mentioned here by Moaza, they use member checking to validate that. Okay, as you see at the bottom, receiving a copy of the text to validate the findings, to make sure that there is that level of truth value is maintained. Okay, so because that's a very important part of phenomenology. So if you've come up with something from your analysis and then you give it back to your participants and they say, well, this really has nothing to do with what I've expressed to you in my interview, then there's a problem there with the validity of the study, according to the phenomenological approach, right? Because if you've captured it really the way they've experienced it, that will show in your findings. And the people to agree with you on that is got to be the participants of the study. They have to say, yes, you have captured, my truth, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, that's not what they'll say, but that's essentially what it is. You've captured it well. Okay, so that's why member checking is such an important part of phenomenology, right? To make sure that you've really done justice to the experience of your participants. Okay, so let's just, yeah. Okay, next slide.
Okay, that's all from us.
Okay, sorry, any other? There's another comment I missed. Somebody want to say something?
Prof. Hanizan here.
Yes.
Prof, I would like to ask something about bracketing. Like, look, let's say I'm conducting a research on something which is I've conducted during last time when I was in the service. Now I'm doing the same topic in my research. We know that as much as possible, we try to bias, we try to keep ourselves biased from what we already known from the process or the phenomenon. How can it actually, how can it be as much as possible that we can keep ourselves not to be biased, and how can it be translated in our writings? Can the examiner actually see the bias in our writing, or what?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. That's a really excellent question, and this comes up a lot. I mean, bracketing has, of course, received a lot of criticism, and there are many phenomenologists themselves that say that bracketing is impossible. And in fact, that's really what the hermeneutic school of phenomenology, that was one of the things that really was the stimulus for that school, was that this idea that the researcher can really bracket their previous experiences and their biases and all that is they claim it's impossible. You can't do it. So But the idea is that because this particular approach to phenomenology, this transcendental approach, is descriptive. Okay, it's very descriptive. So you're really doing your best just to describe the phenomena as it's experienced and explained to you. So in other words, you're not doing a lot of interpretation from, you're trying your best not to interpret from your own kind of experience, but you're trying to interpret from their experience. So for example, if they tell you something and you're trying to understand what it means, you don't make those assumptions based on what you may have experienced in a similar context, right? You do everything you can to collect that that description or that clarification from them. Okay, and this is why often they do multiple interviews with their participants, because they need to get a lot of clarity in terms of the meaning of the data from their perspective, right? So they have to be very clear about everything. So it's a very descriptive approach, and but bracket, like, make no mistake, bracketing has been critiqued on many levels as to what extent we can really do bracketing. And there's different ways of ensuring that you're, or at least trying to ensure that you're not being so quote unquote biased. A lot of it has to do with, one is member checking, okay, and that's a very useful and very powerful way of doing it. Because again, if you have infused a lot of your own kind of views or what you've mentioned before as bias into your finding in your data, once you give it back to the participants, they will be able to tell you whether you've done that or not, because again, it's their life that you're trying to capture. But if you've infused it with all of your opinions and all of your theoretical biases and whatnot, they'll tell you, right? If you're really doing good member checking, they'll tell you. So that's one reason why member checking is so important in a phenomenological study. Okay, that's number one. Number two is, you can use other means. You can have other people check your interviews, your interview data, your questions, your analysis, right? Because it for those who have, I've examined so many qualitative theses. Like, when something is written with from that type of perspective, with a lot of the researcher's own bias, it's very evident. It's very evident. It comes across very clearly. Okay, so it's something that examiners can easily pick up on. I'm not sure. Does that help, Hanizan?
Yeah, very much helpful. So much. Thank you, thank you, bro.
I mean, if you want to do this kind of study, you really have to commit yourself to really doing everything you can to, I'm committed to really understanding these people's lives and what they're experiencing without my own biases getting in the way. You have to have that mindset. You have to have that commitment. If you don't have that commitment, then you should not be doing this type of research, really. Because you're just going to end up with something that's just going to reflect your own whatever, whether it's a bias or it's an opinion, or you have a sort of negative, sentiment towards that topic, whatever it is, it's going to come out. So if you're not really committed to this type of research and the purpose of it, then don't do it, because it's not easy. It's not easy to do. But if you are committed to it, it can be done. And in fact, later in the semester, I'm going to share with you a really nice phenomenological study. It's a really good example of how it can be done. And in fact, we're going to use the example in that study. The researcher did what's called a positionality statement, which we're going to be doing in a few weeks. And I used that in the class as the example for that. And he did a very nice job. And I also have his whole thesis up there as well on Pujulas, so you can read that. But that's a really good example of how transcendental phenomenology is carried out, and of how, because this researcher, he was studying a topic that was very close to his own experience. And so that makes it very challenging to do bracketing, but he was able to do it, and he explains how he did it and so forth. So it's good, but you really have to commit. You have to be committed to it without question. Okay, so any other questions before we break for our buka puasa?
Prof, I do have a question. I recently read a thesis about a student using phenomenological case study.
Yep.
and I find it very interesting. So can you
Yeah.
please explain a little bit further what is the difference between the normal phenomenology and also the phenomenological case study? Because I could not really get the difference from the thesis that I read, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in some ways, all phenomenology is a case study because, you know, you can make the argument that because especially in this type of phenomenology, transcendental phenomenology, like we talked about tonight, the finding itself is written in the form of themes, but then also at the end, there's also that descriptive statement of the sort of a summary statement of the whole case, the whole sample, where you describe the phenomenon from the perspective of the whole sample. And that is very, very much in some ways like a case study. You know, you're drawing conclusions about the case. And in this case, the case may be a group of people. Now, if you want to do a phenomenological case study, you know, you could do it like on where you combine case study and phenomenology. You could do it on like a school or an organization, you know, where you really have a clear case with clear parameters, you know, this particular organization or this particular youth group or, you know, something like that. And yeah, you are studying their lived experience according to some particular phenomenon, right? And so you're really combining the two approaches, and it's quite common. You see quite a few studies that use phenomenological case study, but that's usually what it is. They're just looking at phenomenology within the parameters of a specific bounded case. Okay, so but a regular case study would usually not so much focus on a particular lived experience. It might be dealing with a particular issue, you know, some sort of management problem, or, you know, it's not necessarily trying to describe lived experience in that way. Okay, case study usually uses multiple types of data collection, triangulation, and so forth. You know, so when you combine them, they take more of the flavor of phenomenology. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Shada.
Oh, can I ask a bit about triangulation? I mean, like the English word triangular itself means that there's at least three, right?
Yeah.
But for me, if let's say that we want to triangulate something in qualitative research, in the paper that what he did was that he had different sorts of data sources and he also interviewed different groups of people. Do we really necessarily need to have like, you know, three different sources of data for us to say that we have
No, you don't need
triangulated?
three. You don't need three. You need two. You need two. Usually triangulation, at least two. So you're coming at the top. You're coming at the topic from at least two different either methods or two sets of data or two theoretical perspectives, etc. Yeah. It doesn't require three. So don't get confused by the term.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Maizura here, sorry, yeah. It's just a question from Ms. Tan just now when she was mentioning about triangulation, and you mentioned about at least we need to have two. Can triangulation be part of validation, Prof?
Yes. Yeah.
Is it can be considered?
Yeah, it is one of the strategies for ensuring trustworthiness. Yep.
Thank you, Prof.
Yep. Okay, let's have our break now. And so Salamat Berbuka for all those who are breaking fast.
Yes,
And we'll come
you,
back
Prof.
in about half an hour, okay?
Thank you, Prof.
All right.
Thank you, Prof.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, is everyone back?
Yeah, yes.
Yes, Prof.
Okay, I hope we didn't have to rush too much. Okay, so let me, what I'd like to do now, as I mentioned earlier in the class, I'd like us to take a little bit, just a few minutes to look at the example problem statements that I gave you. I put them in Pucha Blast, so if you haven't looked at them yet, you can check them out after the class. Now, where is my, why can't I find it? Oh, that's not it. All right. Okay, so here they are. So yeah, these are on Pucha Blast. I've uploaded them, so you can view this from there. Now, this is a set of about 6, I believe, 6 problem statements, 5, something like that. Yeah. Now, these are all qualitative studies, and like I mentioned earlier, they are very brief. Usually, when we think of a problem statement, we think of at least a maybe 3 or 4 page essay, and it's okay if your problem statement is a little bit longer, you know, because some studies maybe you're looking at multiple issues that require a bit more space. But what I really want to just show you is that it is possible to do a problem statement that's quite concise, all right? And if we have a strong structure to our problem statements, if our problem is clear, then it's actually quite doable, all right? So let's just look at the first one together. And as you can see that on the right side, Prof. Sharon, who put these together for us, Sharon Merriam, she outlines the dissection of the problem statement, okay? And so she uses this formula of context, significance, gap, and purpose in all of her problem statements. And it's just one way of organizing the problem statement. But it is important to write a problem statement with a clear organization, a clear structure, okay? So she gives a little bit of background, and the background here is background mostly from literature, all right, from previous studies. Okay, that's what's meant here by the context. This is not local context or study context. This is context in terms of the problem in its knowledge context, really, in terms of what we know about the problem. And that's what's meant here by context. Okay, so it says here, this is a study on the transfer of the learning process from outdoor adventure-based programs to the practice setting. Okay, so it says here, in 1990, $46 billion was spent on training in the United States of America. Of the $46 billion, $230 million were spent directly on outdoor adventure-based experiential programming. By 1998, these figures had jumped to a staggering $100 billion spent on training, with $500 million going directly to outdoor adventure-based experiential programming. There's currently every indication that these figures will continue to grow. Okay, so I mean that is something that you might also read in a sort of background of study section in chapter 1. Okay, but the way he writes the essay is quite clear. Then he talks about from there he talks about the significance of this. So despite these huge sums of money, however, little is known about the process through which employees take learning from outdoor adventure-based programs and apply it within their workplace environments. Okay, now typically there would be some references here, and it's not quite clear why I'm trying to find my, that's not it. Is that it? Yeah, I'm not quite clear. It's not quite clear why he didn't use references here, but typically like here there'd be references, you know, here there'd be references and stuff. And he even mentions the current transfer literature, okay, and there's no references mentioned. So it's quite strange that he has some references here, but he doesn't have them here, which is kind of weird. Okay, so I'm not really sure why that is, but nevertheless, now he's going to talk about the significance of the problem. So he says, despite these huge sums of money, there's little is known about the process through which employees take learning from outdoor adventure-based programs and apply it within the workplace environments. Okay, so clearly he's talking about a process. He's going to start talking about a process. This is a giveaway that this is a qualitative study. Okay, because he uses the word process. Little is known about the process through which this takes place. In short, there are a few insights into the transfer of training process as it relates directly to this particular type of program. The current transfer literature does identify certain variables, okay, and that's an indication that there's been quantitative research done, okay, identification of variables thought to impact the transfer process. Much of this literature, however, is based upon research involving a wide range of populations. Again, another indication that this is a quantitative literature. attempting to transfer learning from specific experimental activities to other controlled experimental situations. Okay, there you go. This is quantitative. The current body of literature, though informative, reveals certain variables in isolation as they affect the transfer efforts of varying populations within controlled experimental situations. In addition, these variables have been applied mostly to traditional forms of training programs. There are very few examples of transfer research efforts involving adults attempting to transfer the learning from outdoor adventure-based training program to their professional practice environment. Okay, so here's the gap. Okay, and you can see the gap here. There are very few examples of transfer research efforts involving adults attempting to transfer the learning from outdoor programs to their professional practice environments. Therefore, the purpose of the study was to understand how, okay, another giveaway, it's a qualitative study, how adult learners transfer adventure-based experiential learning to their workplace environments. Okay, the following questions guided the study. What do participants learn during this type of program? This is a very descriptive question. All right, so that's not like a very rich kind of meaning-making question. This is a very descriptive question. What do they learn? All right, what do they learn? Very exploratory. Through what process do adult learners individually and collectively transfer this learning to the workplace? Okay, so what is the process of transfer? Okay, now we're getting into something a bit more related to like grounded theory here, GT. All right, what process do they transfer this learning? What learner, instructor, and program design and workplace factors influence this transfer process? Okay, and this is more like trying to identify variables from the ground. Okay, trying to identify them through an inductive process. All right, so this is pretty clearly written as a qualitative study. All right. So context, sort of a background to the problem. Okay, significance is the significance. Why is it a problem? Right? Why is it a problem? And where's the evidence of the problem? Right? That's what significance is here. Okay, gap, the research gap, as mentioned here, and then purpose. Now, in terms of Razia's question earlier, there's no theoretical gap here mentioned. Okay, there's only this is really just a knowledge gap that's mentioned. There's no mention of theory here. So if you wanted to also touch on the theoretical gap, you could also add that to your problem statement. And of course, that would make the problem statement longer, but it's perfectly acceptable. If you really want to emphasize a theoretical gap, you can also add that in here as well. Okay. Razia, is that clear? Did you hear that? I don't even know if you're there, but assuming you are. Is she there? Maybe she's not there. Okay. Any questions about this example?
Prof?
Yeah.
Prof, for qualitative research, do we really need to put the theories gap in the problem statement?
No, you don't. That's why, as you can see here, there's no theoretical gap mentioned. You know, it's again, it's not really that common to find a qualitative study that really focuses on theoretical gap. You know, that's typically what you'll find in a quantitative study, because quantitative studies, given the fact that they're based very much on theory, they you know what they want to do is they want to show how their study is going to extend existing theory, whereas qualitative studies often use theory not so much in an attempt to extend them so much, although you can with a qualitative study, but it's not really the main objective. You know, especially if you're doing a study that's very exploratory, very even like grounded theory studies, you know, you have very little theory to work with to begin with. So there's really it's really not the purpose of that kind of research, you know. But again, I mean, if, you know, just, you know, getting findings that might help, you know, to better understand how relevant the theory is to that particular context is an extension of theory. You know, so that's enough of a use of theory for your study. You know, like for example, you're using a theory that has not really been used very much in the particular setting that you're studying. You know, there's possibilities there for extending theory, and that's fine. That's how theories are developed. That's how theories evolve. Is they get applied in different settings, and from there the theories become improved and refined and so forth. So that's just the theory building process. So yeah, so it's not as much of a priority in qualitative research. I would say. Go ahead. Sorry, Maizora.
Thank you, Prof.
Go ahead. Did you have another question? Did you have a follow-up question? No.
Prof, not about problem statement.
Oh, okay. Well, you can ask it. It's okay.
I just wondering, Prof, is it because how do I put this? Because some of qualitative research, they have their own way of writing the topic. While I was doing my first assignment, I was wondering how should we.
You froze. She froze.
Objective or the research question.
Maizura, you got cut off in the middle of your statement. Can you repeat it? I didn't hear you.
All right. Some of the topic, when we're doing qualitative research, how do we make sure that our topic itself are not font towards quantitative? Because throughout our samples, we are more exposed to quantitative than qualitative research.
Yeah.
So sometimes, I don't know, maybe Prof, you can assist us with some of the article that we can refer to what makes a research sounds like quali instead of quanti in terms of the RQ and RO, even the topic itself, Prof.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, good question. I mean, that's how I was trying to point out some of the keywords here in this first problem statement that really highlight the fact that it's a qualitative study. Okay, so you can see the way that he positions and frames his literature view here. He talks about the current literature does identify certain variables. Okay, so even the word variable here is a quantitative term. So he's basically saying that much of the previous literature has looked at the topic from a quantitative perspective. Okay, he also makes a mention of experimental situations. This is also quantitative, right? Experimental again. All right, and so he's trying to say that much of the previous literature is looking at the topic from the perspective of specific variables in a very controlled environment, etc. And he's really emphasizing here from that. He's trying to emphasize the fact that it hasn't really been looked at as a process, as a holistic process. Okay, and he uses that term process several times. Okay, where is it? Transfer research efforts. Okay, how they transfer these learnings to their professional practice. All right, and so anytime you see this kind of a statement of use of language to understand how adult learners transfer learning, that is a very qualitative way of writing it. Okay, first of all, the word understand, where the purpose is to understand something, that's very qualitative. And then to understand how something happens, right? How learners transfer. That is, again, looking at process. Okay, what's the process? Okay, so you can't, I mean, that's clearly not a there's no way you can study that quantitatively. You cannot try to delineate a process through quantitative means. It's impossible. You cannot do that. That can only be done through qualitative research. Okay, so these are some of the ways in terms of language that you want to pay attention to. These are some of the things. Okay, and this kind of question, what do participants learn? That's a very open-ended, exploratory kind of question, right? Now, I mean, technically, you could also answer this question quantitatively. I mean, if you had a rich, robust literature, you could, do a survey of all those different ways that they learn and then just ask them to tick off or whatever. But it's written in a way that's very exploratory. And they sort of mention here that there hasn't been a lot of research done on it. So this is a very exploratory kind of question. What factors influence this transfer process? And now this question could be quantitative, right? So the way it's written, but again, it's also more exploratory. But the emphasis in the problem statement, this part here, is on this process question. So this is really the main research question, is the process. So I mean, those are some of the catchwords in this particular problem statement, okay, that you want to look for. All right, so let's go to the next one. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No. So it takes us like through experience to be alert on what is quantity and quality, is it, bro? Because
yeah, well, you have to read a lot of qualitative studies, and you have to look for the patterns, the patterns in the writing, the kind of catchwords, keywords that they use, right? The way that they frame their problem statements, especially when it comes to methods. Like here they do imply that there's a methodological gap. They don't say it outright, but they imply it because they talk about previous research being mostly in controlled experimental situations, blah, blah, blah. That's clearly pointing to a methodological gap. They're saying basically that it's only been looked at in this particular way. Right. And so,
thank you, Prof.
Yeah, so framing it that way will help you to make a case for your qualitative study. Now let's look at the next one and see if what the language is like, and see if we can pick up on the sort of qualitative catchwords. Okay, so here they say, the author, she writes, growing numbers, this is called role of self-directed learning. Growing numbers of older adults are placing increasing demands on medical services systems and subsequently will affect the future direction of healthcare policy. In response to the increasing numbers, costs, and healthcare needs of older adults, the medical establishment has changed patient care policies. For example, managed care provider reimbursement policies have created incentives to move patients quickly through the healthcare system and have pressured physicians to limit office visit time for dialogue and health education. In response to these changes, health educators have been promoting an active role for patients in their own healthcare. The importance of understanding factors. Okay, here we go, qualitative language. The importance of understanding factors contributing of health maintenance, or to health maintenance, it should be, to health maintenance is especially relevant for older adults. That is this segment of the population who are most at risk. Those older adults who have taken control of their healthcare are self-directing their own learning. However, little is known about how older adults are using self-directed learning. Again, this word how. Little is known about how they're using self-directed learning to gain access to health information and how this information is affecting their healthcare. Okay, so the gap here is written in a very qualitative manner, all right? It doesn't say, little is known about the relationship between self-directed learning and something else. Like, that would be clearly a quantitative correlational study, right? Again, it's looking at identifying factors, identifying processes. Okay, so it says the purpose of the study was to understand, again, the word understand, the role of self-directed learning in older adults' healthcare. The research questions that guide the study are as follows. What motivates them, older adults, to take control of their healthcare? Okay, again, very open-ended. What healthcare behaviors are controlled by self-directed learners? What contextual factors are controlled by self-directed learners? What is the process, again, process of self-directed learning of one's healthcare? How does self-directed learning affect one's healthcare? Okay, it doesn't say what is the effect of X and Y on self-directed learning. That would be quantitative. It just says, how does self-directed learning affect their healthcare? Right? And again, this is going to be obviously answered from their perspective, right? Using the epistemology of qualitative research, we're not looking here for an objective answer to this question. We're looking for an answer to this question based on their experience. Okay, so that's the assumption of qualitative research. That's the methodology. That's the epistemology. Okay, so from the perspective of this sample of these older adults that they're going to interview, they want to know, how does self-directed learning affect their healthcare? Okay, so you can see it's a lot of the same catchwords: understanding factors, how, what motivates them, what behaviors are controlled. It's very very exploratory in its presentation. Okay, Maizura, is that clear? Can you see the words, the language there?
Yes, Prof.
The use of language?
Yes. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, should we do one more just to maybe we get some other additional terms here that we can refer to? Okay, let's look at this one. How museum docents, what's a museum docent? Develop expertise. I've never heard of that word. The number of museums in the US is growing, as are the roles these cultural institutions play with visitors and the community. Notice how they always start their problem statements with a statement that's very much about sort of everyday life. I mean, this is just a phenomenon in society, right? They always start there, you know, and it provides a sort of relevance of the study, you know, to everyday life. All right, so they're grounding the study in a real everyday kind of phenomenon. So that's really important to keep in mind. With this growth comes the demand for educational programming for the public that is engaging, worthwhile, and even entertaining. This demand necessitates the need for museums to call up volunteers to serve as docents and interpreters of objects and exhibits. To meet this end, institutions must prepare docents, yet often the training is brief or insufficient for the demands of the job. If museums are to utilize docents effectively, museum educators must have a better understanding of how to address the training and developmental needs of these individuals. Even with an increasing need for understanding how docents learn their craft and gain expertise, literature in the fields of adult education, human resource development, and museum studies is lacking in this area. All right, so there's clearly a problem, a gap statement. Now, again, this particular problem statement, there's no use of references, okay? But you should, it is good practice to use references in the problem statement, all right? I'm assuming maybe she took them out for the sake of this exercise. She just took out the references to make it shorter. I don't know. But it's really important to have references in your problem statements. Okay. So literature in the fields of these is lacking in this area. Okay, so this is the gap. Regardless of whether they are professionals or volunteers, the limited research related to the education of docents, okay, limited research related to the education, that's a gap, is discouraging considering the crucial role docents play in many museums and cultural institutions. This is the significance of the gap. Okay, so they're highlighting the significance of the gap. All right, scroll down. I'll have to erase my marks. Currently, museum educators can draw from the resources and practitioner texts to plan and carry out training programs, but little empirical data exists to support these processes. It is important to investigate the docent learning process and the influence of things such as informal learning on docents' acquisition of knowledge and skills, communities of practice, and professional practice. Despite inconsistent training, docents become expert or master docents, yet little is known about how these individuals develop expertise. Okay, so clearly that is the main gap statement there. Despite inconsistent training, little is known about how they develop their expertise. Again, the word how there, very qualitative kind of question. The purpose of the study was to examine the nature of docent expertise. Okay, the research questions are the following. What are the characteristics that define an expert docent? Okay, that's another sort of descriptive type of question. Whether describe what are the characteristics of their that define expertise. What types of learning experiences lead to the development of expert docents? Okay, another kind of open-ended question. How does the museum context shape docent learning? Very qualitative question. What is the process for becoming an expert docent? Okay, so again, these very similar catchwords. What types, characteristics, how, process, how. Okay, so you can kind of see the trend here, I think. It's quite obvious, the nature of these types of qualitative questions. All right. And so if you use this sort of typology here, context, significant gap, and purpose, it might help you also in the development of your own problem statement. Okay, because the problem statement should have a structure to it. It should have a clear structure to it, you know. And this is a very simple structure, but it works well. This particular structure, it works well if you structure your problem statements according to this. Okay. All right. Any other questions about this? These problem statements. So you can access this on Puja Blast, you know. And again, you can use it as a sort of frame for your own problem statement, just to make sure that you are hitting on all these four key areas. really try to structure it that way. It'll help you. It'll help you.
Hello, Prof.
Yeah, was there a question? I heard somebody.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Prof. Suraju Muhammad.
Okay.
Yeah, yes. I have additional comment.
Okay.
In relation to the Missoura's question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Most of the time, to my understanding, is if you want to conduct a research, you want to find out the experience of the participant, or you want to find out about their feelings or perceptions. So those variables are more of qualitative research.
Yes, that's true.
Yes,
that is true. But don't forget that be careful with this word perception. A lot of students like to use this word perception in their studies. Quantitative social science research is also perception. In fact, our surveys are perception surveys where we're trying to measure perception. Okay, so that word perception can be used. It can be like a double-edged sword. You know, it can be used in different ways. So don't rely solely on perception, because you know, a quantitative researcher can come back and say, well, our studies measure perception, right? Because social science attitudinal studies, attitudinal surveys are essentially perception surveys, where we're asking people's perceived views on things. Okay, so perceptions can be measured. You know, perceptions can be measured. But you can also study the perceptions qualitatively. Okay, so I agree with you, Suraju. I agree with you, but just be careful of your use of that word perception. Okay.
Okay, Prof.
It's really about depth. It's really about the way we study perception and the level of depth of perception, right? And it's about describing people's perceptions as opposed to trying to measure their perceptions. Yeah, there's a difference there. There's a big difference.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, but thank you for that comment. That's good. Okay, anyone else? Yeah, Wafi.
When we talk about the process, it is a must or an obligation for researcher to describe the step by step, step 1, step 2, or stage 1, stage 2, and another. It is what we call it's obligation to describe, to define it.
No. It totally depends on what you get from your findings in terms of a process. In other words, you may from the data, there may be a very clear, evident process. Step 1, step 2, step 3. That may be a finding. However, it may also be more of just sort of generic, you know, sort of generic steps. You know, not really well defined. Maybe not even the order. You're not even sure of the order of the process yet. But you know that there's certain phases to the process, you know, phase 1, phase 2. That may be the finding, okay? What you're trying to do is you're just trying to show that there is this, there is some sort of systematic pattern to it. You know, it has a beginning, it has an end, and it has intermediate steps, right? You know, and we call that a process. You know, you're trying to explain how that thing happens. Right, so that may be general phases, that may be specific steps. It really depends on the data and what you find. So I wouldn't box yourself in and say at the beginning of the study, you know, you're going to come up with a very detailed step-by-step process, you know, of how this should happen or how this works. Because your data, you may not be able to get that from the data. You know, it may not be that clear from your finding. All right, so that's why when they say process, they're really just talking. I mean, they don't know what they're going to get, right? And that's part and parcel of qualitative research. It's exploratory. So when you explore, you don't know what you're going to get. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. The process is really just trying to explain how something happens. What is the pattern? You know, that systematic way it happens, it comes about, or whatever. You know, so you're just trying to explain that really. Anting had a question.
This is Hajun just speaking.
Anting, is that you, Anting? Oh no, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Junior, yeah, this Yeah, if my memory is correct, and I think passage 4 is a good example for this because the author adopt many references in his passage than the previous 3 examples. And so maybe if you want a more specific example, passage 4 is the best one, I think. And also, passage 4 is yeah.
Oh, because the use of references, is that what you mean?
Yes, because in the previous 3 passages that the author seldom used references when they talk about the background of his research, right?
Yep, that's right. That's right.
So maybe that's this example is much better. And I also find that there is it seems that there is logic to when the research compose his background. So could you please give us some plausible or the effective logic that is suitable when we write something about the background and also the background and so the information gap or the research gap in this article?
Okay, so you're speaking specifically to this one here. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's read this together and then we can sort of dissect it together. Okay, so this is called Embodied Knowledge, an exploration of how social work practitioners incorporate embodied knowledge into practice. Okay, so even the title itself is very qualitative. Okay, if you look at the title, an exploration of how social work practitioners incorporate embodied knowledge into practice. So even the title itself is implying a process. Okay, and process of knowledge knowledge incorporation into practice. Okay, and so the authors write. The author writes, the mind-body dualistic approach to learning has dominated the field of education since the Enlightenment. Okay, so you see, they always start out with a sort of very broad-based starting point. You know, it's the background is, it always starts off with a sort of general background. They don't jump right into the specific problem that they're studying. They always give a sort of perspective, you know, a bigger perspective, you know, from a larger perspective. And that's often the way they start. And this is what we call the logic here is often referred to as what's called the funnel way of writing, where you start generally and you get more specific as you proceed through the problem statement. Right? So it starts off general, and as you go down, it gets more specific, right? And then at the end is the specific problem that you're going to deal with. Okay, so you start off with a sort of general statement, general comment of, again, where you're going to situate the problem. What is it? Where does it fit within the larger scheme of things? Okay, and then the implications of that. So he says here, this view has not only created an unrealistic separation of the mind from the body, but also promoted the mind over the body in the knowledge creating process. Okay, and here's where your comment about references is very important, because here they're making these claims. These are very strong claims, actually, what he's making here, but they're not his. They are being supported by previous research. Okay, and that's why I said it's really important to have those references in your problem statement, because you're trying to show that these arguments that you're making, you're not pulling them out of thin air. They're from your reading of the literature. Okay, they come from your analysis of the literature. All right. Then it says social workers have been taught through formal education to engage in reflective practice with an emphasis on critical reflection as a way to evaluate their practice. The profession has recognized that social workers must develop self-awareness as it impacts their relationship with clients. Although the profession, now in a problem statement, we'll often see a word like this, although, however, despite this fact. Okay, they like to use this language to show that even though this is what's happening, there's something else going on here that has not yet been studied. Okay, and that's where the although or the however comes in. Although the profession has begun to explore the integration of body and mind in both social work practice with clients and for social worker self-awareness, there is no research on, that's a gap statement, there is no research on how embodied knowledge is manifested, reflected upon, and specifically integrated in social work practice. Okay, so this is a very clear gap statement. Okay, so he's saying basically, although the profession has begun to explore, in other words, at least there's been some research done on this topic of body-mind integration, and he quotes previous studies here. Okay, there is no research on how embodied knowledge is manifested, reflected upon, and specifically integrated into social work practice. And he's identifying the gap here. Right. So there's been some work done here, but they haven't specifically gone into this. All right, and that's what he's saying. All right, and so that's what makes his gap statement. So I have to erase. Okay, and then his purpose statement and research questions. And if you want, you can write it like this as well. You can write purpose statement and research questions. You know, you can write. Yeah, go ahead. You want to include that as a subheading? That's fine. The purpose of the study was to understand how embodied knowledge is integrated in social work practice, into social work practice. The study addressed the following research questions. How did the context of social work nurture or shape the use of embodied knowledge? How? What impact did social workers' embodied knowledge have on their practices? How did social workers develop and experience embodied knowledge? Okay, this is a new one. So how did they, so how is not new, but how did they develop and experience embodied knowledge? So here we get into the experiential element of qualitative research. So I have a student that's just finishing up, and she did a very interesting study on, it was actually what's the word? She developed an intervention. She's a student in the Department of Counseling, and she developed an intervention, but she assessed the intervention qualitatively. The reason being is that she really wanted to understand how her clients experienced the intervention. So she wasn't focusing so much on the hard outcomes of the intervention, but she really wanted to understand their experience going through it. Okay, so her whole research is really about that issue of their experience during the intervention. And so her questions are like that. You know, how did they experience this phase? How did they experience that phase? So it's very much based on experiential, and it's a very descriptive study, obviously. If you ask a question about experience, the expectation is that the participants are going to describe what they're going through, right? What is experience? It's that, again, it's that lived reality. And so they're going to describe that experience. Okay, so that's a very descriptive type of question.
Yeah,
okay.
Talking about the background, that some research was started from the reality problem. For example, what's happened in their society or living environment. But some of the researchers was started by the phenomenon exactly in some research, just like this article. So which one do you think it is best?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Can you repeat the question?
I mean, in the background information section, that some of the researchers will started this part by the problems existing in their daily life, right?
Here.
Just like the previous three articles. But some of the researchers will start their this part by the problem they found in some literature. So which one do you think is best?
They're different styles. I mean, if you've done a lot of this background sort of setting work, if you've included this in your introduction, in other words, your introduction to your study in chapter 1, you don't necessarily have to repeat it in the problem statement. Okay, so it's not really necessary if you've already covered all this. And usually in a chapter 1, a lot of the initial background to the study will be talking about a lot of this sort of background stuff. Okay, so it's really up to you. There's no particular right or wrong here in terms of how you craft the problem statement. Okay, but what's important is that you think of the problem statement as a standalone essay. In other words, it shouldn't read like it's cut off or it's disconnected in some way. So you just jump in and you start talking about, gap statement, and you haven't really laid out the argument as to what the gap is. Do you know what I mean? So that's why I like the examples that they give here, is that, almost all of them have this kind of framing in the beginning where they situate the problem in a larger sort of everyday context. Now, maybe they've already discussed that earlier on in the chapter 1. We don't know. We don't have the full study, and it's okay. It's all right to repeat it a little bit. You know, it's not a crime to do that. You know, but I mean, there really is no formula for doing it. It's really up to you, and it's how you write. You know, so it's a matter of choice, really. But again, as long as you have produced a cohesive essay that clearly articulates the problem, you know, and the gap, and that's the most important part.
Okay, and also as for the description, which is started by what, and it is also suitable for both the qualitative research and also the quantitative research, right?
It can be, yeah. That's why you should never look at words alone. You know, don't think that just because they have a what in the question, then therefore it's quantitative. No. It doesn't work that way. First, you have to look at the question itself in the context of the overall purpose of the study. All right, and that's why you need a good purpose statement here, right? You need a good purpose so that you can first delineate what is the overall purpose of the study. When we see here, it's to understand how so this is clearly, they're trying to understand some kind of process here, and it's clearly qualitative. And then these research questions should help us achieve this purpose. And that's the point, that there should be a clear connection between the purpose and the research questions. Okay. So you can have what in your qualitative research questions? Yes, you can, especially if they're written in this way. They're written very sort of exploratory. Okay. How is obviously more of a qualitative question. Why is a more qualitative question. But you will find a lot of qualitative studies that use what in their research questions. And it's quite okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
thank you,
sure.
Professor.
Good questions. Okay, so there's a couple in the chat box here. I just want to make sure I get to. Anting said, hi, does the context mean the facts? I mean, that sometimes context refers to a generally acknowledged fact. Yeah, sort of. Yeah, you could think of it that way. Sort of it's also just the context of how that phenomenon has been studied to date. You know, so sort of like the literary context, or the context in terms of the body of knowledge, sort of like where does this topic sit in the body of knowledge? Okay. How safe is it to make a strong gap statement such as there is no research on? Okay, good question. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, Chayang. A lot of people do make those kind of statements. I would be careful with saying there is no research on. Okay, because how do you know? You just haven't found, you know, maybe you missed something. So
and what about you? Yes, there's little research, yet there's little know about. What about this expression?
Yeah, little is known about this, or a few studies have looked at this, or there is no known research. Sometimes if you say there is no known research, means to you, like it's not known to you, right? So there is no known research, or yeah, but it is it's something that you want to you usually want to try to avoid that kind of a statement.
Because sometimes if let's say we write to the best of our knowledge, there is no blah, blah.
That's fine. That's okay. Yeah, if you qualify it like that, that's okay. Yeah. But that's very different than saying there is no research. I know for a fact, I've read every single paper in the world. So yeah, that's fine.
I have one question here.
Yeah.
But look, often that in research questions, they throw one question per. There's only one question in one sentence. So like question number 3 here. I don't know about others, but I've seen like there's 2 questions in one question. How did social workers develop and experience embodied knowing? I see that one is developed and another one is experienced. There's 2 different things that they have been looking in these questions. How is that possible? Can we combine 2 questions in one research question, or we should maintain with one question in each research questions?
Yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah, it's always best to keep them straightforward as much as possible. So it's probably better to keep them separate. In this case, I'm assuming that there is some kind of connection here between developing and experiencing embodied knowledge, and I don't know much about embodied knowing. I don't really know much about the topic, so I can't really comment on that. I'm assuming they're trying to combine these purposefully. In other words, but there's sort of some kind of overlap between developing it and then experiencing it, you know. So that's my assumption. But yeah, the rule base, I mean, if you really want to play on the safe side, then yes, make each question its own standalone question, and don't use the sort of double barrel wording. Okay, but that's a good observation.
Thank you.
Good observation. Yeah. Remember, the research questions are the core of your study. So if you have not answered those research questions clearly by chapter 5, you really have not completed your study. You know, so these are the questions that you're going to be referring back to in your chapter 5. So make sure that they're clear and make sure they're clearly answered through your findings. Okay, and that's why the research questions are like your compass as you're going through the study. They're directing you, they're keeping you on track, they're keeping your analysis on track. You know, it's really all about the research questions. Okay. Anything else? All right, so, okay, so if not, I'll stop sharing this one. So you can, as I said, you can refer to this on Pucha Blast for those who have not looked at it yet. And just briefly, I just want to look at, go back to our traditions and share with you some examples of different studies. These are real studies. Okay, my PowerPoint has been acting weird all day. I don't know why. Try and pull this up. Okay. So these are sample studies from the 5 different approaches. And again, like just to give us a way of comparing and looking at their similarities and differences, I thought by using real studies it would be kind of helpful. And so I like to do this with the class every semester. So starting with narrative analysis, I think some of these examples are really unique types of studies, and I think it gives a good example of what this kind of research is like. Okay, so these are all published journal articles. Okay, so that should also give you a little bit of confidence in terms of your own research, and feeling that you can hopefully publish your research in good quality journals after you've finished your PhDs. Okay, so these are all qualitative journals, and so they're good journals. Understanding youth resilience in Papua New Guinea through life story. Okay, so it says here this life story qualitative research with Papua New Guinea youth shows how resilience is negotiated in a communal cultural context with limited access to formal social services, using extracts from one life story. Okay, so N is equal to 1. Themes of family, faith, and future are discussed. Okay, those are the findings. Implications for human services are the need to. Okay, so they even draw implications for human services, of course, with limitations, obviously, because this is just an N=1 study. Okay, but you can draw implications from an N=1 study. And that's what they do in this research. All right. So even the wording here, how resilience is negotiated in a communal cultural context with limited access to formal social services. This is the main purpose or the main concern of the study. All right. So this is based on the life of one young person. Very nice. Okay. I had a student that did her PhD on 2 young people, and she also used narrative analysis. Okay, and she did a very nice PhD study. All right. Okay, so that's 1. Here's another narrative study. Okay, this is a narrative inquiry into familial and school curriculum making, attending to multiple worlds of Aboriginal youth and families. In this paper, we draw upon a narrative inquiry alongside urban Aboriginal youth and their families in Western Canada. The overall goal of our inquiry was to understand, again, this is qualitative language, their educational and schooling experiences. Shifting our focus from schools as the only place where curriculum is made, we draw on the conceptualization of children, youth, and families as also engaged as curriculum makers in homes and communities, and in the in-between places of homes and schools. In this paper, we explore the multiple curriculum-making worlds of Lane and Donovan, two Aboriginal youth. All right, so this one is N equals 2. As part of understanding the multiple worlds and relationships between the intersections of multiple worlds, we draw on Lugones's concept of world traveling. Okay, so this is related to the culture that they're studying. Now, this could also, this could also be an ethnographic paper study in the way it's presented. We contemplate the importance of understanding lives over time in geographic places and social contexts. We wonder how the worlds youth inhabit are shaped by institutional, social, political, and institutional stories, and how these larger narratives shape the ways in which we attend to the lives of youth. Okay, so it's an embedded study, very much embedded in the culture that they're studying. All right, and they draw on the worlds, the life experiences of these two young people. Okay, and then they draw all these inferences from their work. Okay, again, this is just an example of what narrative analysis looks like. Here's another one. It's like exercise for your soul. How participation in youth arts activities contributes to young people's well-being. Right. Okay, can anybody tell me what this is? What is this called? It's like exercise for your soul.
Metaphor.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Metaphor.
Yep. The use of metaphor. In a lot of these examples I'm going to show you, you're going to see lots of metaphors in the titles of the studies. Why do qualitative researchers like to use metaphors in their titles? Anybody know?
To have catchy title.
Well, it is catchy, but that's not really the main reason, other than just being catchy. Why else would they
actually? I'm just wondering whether it's part of the actual words that's being used by the participants when they were being interviewed.
Yeah, could be. But why put in the title?
Because it shares some similarities with the qualitative research, because when people carry out the qualitative research, they need to interpret the data, such as in the interviews or some videos or something like that, into their passage. And it is for metaphor, people also need to find out what the author really want to say behind the sentence. So that's the similarity between qualitative research and this metaphor. So that's the reason why the author used a metaphor in his title.
Yeah, you're all hitting on it. It's a way of conveying meaning, and most likely it is the words of the respondents. And it also often represents what's called a meta theme for the study. In other words, a lot of qualitative research studies, in fact, when they do analysis, especially in like grounded theory and other types of studies, they will actually identify what's called grounded theory, it's called selective coding. In other types of qualitative research, it's called what we refer to as a meta theme. It's a grand theme that sort of encompasses the main finding from the study, and all the other themes sort of fit underneath that, right? But it's really the encompassing finding from the entire study. It sort of wraps up, it encompasses what the study's all about. Okay, and so they use these metaphors to really convey that meaning, and it's a very powerful way of getting that across to readers, because when you read the metaphor, you can, it really speaks to you. It's a way of communicating that's very powerful. Okay, so in the title, it says how participation in youth arts activities contributes to young people's well-being, right? And this is kind of like the question. And this is kind of like the answer. It's very interesting the way they have the title. It almost includes the research question with the answer to the research question in the title. Very, very, a very clever way of choosing a title. Okay, so how participation in youth arts activities groups it? By, it's like exercise for your soul, right? So, and you can get a sense of what that means. So it says here, active participation in organized youth arts activities is generally considered good for young people's social and emotional well-being. There is, however, less known about how youth arts participation helps to create well-being benefits. This paper details a retrospective narrative study. What is a retrospective narrative study? What does retrospective mean?
Go back in time.
Yeah. So this is historical, you know, they're reflecting back on their previous experiences. Okay, so they're telling stories about the past, really is what it means. This paper details a retrospective narrative study that sought to understand not only what well-being benefits 17 participants, this is a larger study, attributed to youth arts activity, but more specifically how these outcomes occurred. Okay, and then they go and talk about the findings. All right. Now, their findings is interesting here. Like Wafi's question before, they actually came up with a pattern of transformation involving 3 phases that emerged through an analysis of participant stories. Okay, now when they went into the study, I bet you they had no idea that they were going to uncover a 3-phase finding. In other words, a finding that had involved phases, right? Although maybe they did, because the question is about how participation contributes to their well-being. But anyway, the data emerged as 3 phases: joining in, developing skills, and gaining experience, and then becoming a real performer. Okay, so those are the main findings. All right, this is a much more sort of straightforward abstract that you would find in a study. Okay, so narrative does not have to be 1 or 2; it can be larger, as you see here, 17. Okay, but again, it's the emphasis on narrative, the emphasis on stories, right? As they mentioned here. What was that thing about stories? Yeah, stories. Okay, and retrospective is quite common in narrative. My students' study was also retrospective. Because storytelling is something that people do about the past, right? They tell stories about the past, so it's quite common for it to be retrospective. Okay, so that's narrative. So here's, now we look at ethnography. So some studies on ethnography. Okay, here we go, another metaphor, a very useful and powerful metaphor here. Sailing stormy seas. The illness experience of persons with Parkinson's disease. I love it, I love it. I love the use of metaphor. I think it's so powerful. You know, I mean, I can just from those 3 words, I can tell you what the finding of this study is all about. Right? What it's like to be ill with Parkinson's disease, right? Sailing stormy seas. When you sail stormy seas, you know, it's certainly not easy, that's for sure. So, and that's what the authors want us to take away from that, right? Clearly. Parkinson's disease is a chronic progressive disorder with no known cause or promising cure. Somebody's pouring a drink. Sorry, I got distracted by the noise. While substantial information is known about the pathophysiology, little is known about the illness experience of living with the disease. Okay, is it Victor? Okay, I'm gonna mute Victor. Okay. The illness experience was apprehended through field work in 2 support groups and the personal accounts of 14 participants with Parkinson's disease. All right. The metaphor, sailing the sea in the eye of the storm, is the overarching theme and was chosen to conceptualize the voyage of persons living with Parkinson's disease. And 2 prevailing sub-themes were daily negotiations in the midst of uncertainty and reconstruction of the self. Okay, so they use an ethnographic approach. So it's very interesting because it doesn't sound so much like an ethnographic study. Remember, the ethnographic study is what? What is ethnography trying to study? What kind of approach is ethnography?
Culture.
Culture, yeah.
Yeah.
The in-depth case study.
A culture sharing group, right? So
Yeah.
the lived reality or the experiences or something related to a culture sharing group. Okay, so this
is more of like a phenomenological kind of.
It does. It definitely does. It definitely sounds more like phenomenology. Okay. And even it says, I mean, the focus on experience is the illness experience was apprehended through fieldwork in 2 support groups and the personal accounts of 14 participants. So it's a little strange. Of course, we have to read the article. We have to look at their actual methods that they used, you know. But yeah, this one definitely sounds more like phenomenology than ethnography. Okay. So it's important to keep in mind. Sometimes, you know, you come across that. Don't tease me, I'm working. Another metaphor. Okay, examining humor in a Midwestern organization using ethnography of communication. So they actually have the theoretical framework in the title. And you see that sometimes too in studies, they will include the theoretical framework in the title. Theory of planned behavior, you know, you see titles that use things like that. All right, so within organizations, the communicative phenomena of humor is commonplace. Humorous talk is just as important as a particular way of communicating between, as important and frequent, where I lost my place. Humorous talk is just as important and frequent to the regular discourse that takes place between organizational members. In this inquiry, we examine humor as a particular way of communicating between members of a small Midwestern US organization. Specifically, we examine how 3 functions of humor, joking, sarcasm, and teasing, are used among members during normal business hours. This would be a fun study to do, I think. Using ethnography of communication, we conduct both field work and interviews, discovering that this organization exemplifies humor as a socially constructed phenomenon to complete the typical workday. I think this is pretty common of most organizations, actually. But anyway, so ethnography of communication. And so they mentioned field work. This is one of the catchwords of ethnography, field work. All right. And they're really trying to understand here the culture sharing group is the organization, right? And the phenomenon is communication, specifically humor, right? And so they're looking at it culturally, you know, the culture of, you know, this thing called humor and how it fits into the culture of the organization and how they use that to get to the workday. Okay, so this one is much clearer as a ethnography study than the previous one. Okay. But again, metaphor, I like these metaphor studies, as you can see. Another one, look at that, when 2 worlds collide. Shared experiences of educating Navajos living off the reservation. Okay, so Navajos are Aboriginal Orang Asli in the US. We call them Native Americans. So they're the Orang Asli in the US, one of the tribes of Native Americans. Okay, so this is a study on the experiences of educating these Navajo people. Northridge Elementary calls into question the norm-based ideals of the No Child Left Behind Act. Okay, this is a law in the US about education. By constructing a portrait of Northridge, this study reveals the challenges Indigenous students face in the age of standardized assessments. The overarching question of the study is, do high-stakes assessments further the endemic values of colonization? The term colonization in the study refers to federal and state government agencies directing what Indigenous students should be taught at school despite cultural relevance. Sounds very familiar to Malaysia. Could be many countries having the same issue. This study applies the theoretical framework of tribal critical race theory. Okay, so theoretical framework. Remember from our lecture last time, ethnographic studies tend to be very theory driven, right? We mentioned that last time. So again, this study is also very explicit about its theoretical framework. So how it is looking at this phenomenon of culture through this tribal critical race theory, through video photography, observations, interviews with former students, and a teacher focus group to construct portraiture of the educational realities Indigenous students face in the standardized education system. So portraiture here of the educational realities. So that's, you know, kind of a portrait of what they're going through. It's sort of painting a picture of the experiences that they're going through. All right. And because this is an Indigenous community, this is an Aboriginal kind of community, clearly there's the element of culture, and they're looking at it from that perspective. Okay. Now you see the triangulation here is quite extensive, right? And this is also quite common of ethnographic studies because of the fieldwork element, right? They do a lot of fieldwork. So you have video photography, observation, interviews, and focus group. So we've got 4. So you definitely have, you have rectangulation here. Okay, Jiayang. So it's not triangulation, it's rectangulation. We have 4 different data collection methods. All right. Okay, so that's definitely triangulation. All right, let's look at phenomenology, similar to what we talked about today. Teacher-student relationships in court-mandated adult education, a phenomenological study. Now, this study is not that old, 2013. It is in a qualitative journal called the Qualitative Report. So this is a journal that's specific for qualitative research. Because, and the reason I'm mentioning this is because the use of this in the title is something that is not that common anymore. This used to be quite common, say 15 plus years ago, when qualitative research was not really a norm yet. It was kind of like rare, much rarer than it is today. And so often studies would indicate, they would emphasize the fact that they were doing qualitative research by mentioning the type of study that they're doing in the title. So this is quite common for older studies. You don't see as many anymore. Sometimes you still do, but not as many. Okay. So it says, while there's a considerable body of literature on adult correctional education, this literature almost exclusively deals with teachers and students working within incarceration settings where students are in jail or prison. There's a lack of research on the experiences of teachers, okay, working with students who are part of the correctional system but are placed within the community. In this study, the author examines the experiences of teachers working with court-mandated community corrections students in GED programs. 7, okay, that's quite a small sample. 7 adult education teachers share their experiences in this phenomenological study. The findings of the study indicate a special relationship, a chasm between teachers and students. Implications of this chasm, an experience described by Merleau-Ponty, are explored. Okay, so not a whole lot of phenomenological language here other than exploring their experiences. Okay, there is a small sample size. This is quite common in phenomenological studies, only 7 participants. And that's quite common because of the depth, the level of depth of phenomenological studies. They tend to be smaller in sample size. Okay, so it's a pretty straightforward, study. This could be also sort of a generic. If they didn't mention phenomenology, it could also be just a basic generic thematic analysis qualitative study. But there is some element there of phenomenology. The subjective human experience of groove, a phenomenological investigation. Okay, and this is another very recent study, just 2018. Okay, and they mentioned this. Okay. The subjective human experience of groove. This is really interesting. This phenomenological study investigates what it means for listeners to experience groove. Okay, this is very phenomenological. Okay. A purposeful sample of 14 participants listened to stimuli featuring manipulations that have been identified in the groove literature and answered, does this groove? Why? Describe the groove. That's so funny. So this is, qualitative research, you get studies like this, especially in the arts. There's a lot of studies in the arts, music, art, and performance, drama. They do a lot of research like this. Okay, so it's really interesting. Firstly, no single definition of what groove is, no one-to-one mappings of music detail, etc., 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 to experience of groove can be found within the results. Nor is there any consensus as to what a specific track has groove or not. Secondly, thematic analysis of statements shows 5 emergent themes. Okay, so these are the main findings. Pleasure, movement, energy, tension, relaxation, expectation, surprise, and technical language. Through discussion of examples, these categories are shown to be interconnected and may have some causal links. The aim of this study is to complement empirical groove research by emphasizing and advocating for the qualitative phonological experience of listeners. So they're emphasizing here a methodological gap, actually, and they're trying to promote and advocate for the use of qualitative research in this type of research. This is the study of music. Okay, so it's a very, very unique study, very interesting. But I love the question, does this groove, why? Describe the groove. Okay, so it's really cool. So you find a lot of really neat studies like this in qualitative research. Okay, but again, it's the same kind of idea, is deeply experiential, right? And this is very experiential in terms of how people experience music, okay, and studying that. College student mentors and Latino youth, a qualitative study of the mentoring relationship. This is also phenomenological. Okay, so this phenomenological study describes the meaning of mentoring relationships. Okay, so anytime you see that, the meaning or the experience, okay, usually it's referring to phenomenology, especially meaning. Meaning is a big phenomenological catchword. And again, this is a very small sample. Okay, so relationships from the perspective of 6 selected mentors involved in this program. Okay, clusters of themes pertaining to the mentor's relationship with the mentee. So they're looking at the relationship between the mentor and the mentee. Only 6, because there's only 6 mentors that fulfill their criteria. Okay, that's part of it. That's, you don't read that here, but it's in the study. And then they present the findings here. I'm not going to go into the findings, but just to identify some of the catchwords. So mentors highlighted challenges that characterize the mentoring relationships at various points in time. However, relationship strengths outweighed potential obstacles. Okay. Clusters of themes pertaining to the mentor's relationships with the mentee, the relationship of the mentor with the mentee's family, and the mentor's personal and professional development contributed to the meaning of the mentoring relationship for LAMP mentors. So this is a very much, this study emphasizes on really what the meaning is behind the relationship and trying to really understand what that is. Okay. So again, another small sample, just 6. Okay, so phenomenology, we can see descriptive, meaning making, small samples. Okay, usually thematic analysis. They present some sort of themes as their findings. Okay, so these are some of the common characteristics that we find. Okay, we're out of time. It's 9 o'clock. So, but these are posted up on in Puja Blast also, so you can look at the rest of these. And if you have questions, feel free to bring them to class later. Okay, we have time for one more question. If there's one more question, one more looming question out there. No? So we've all reached saturation point for tonight. Okay, so I guess that's it for this week. Inshallah, see you all next week. Have a great week. If there's any issues or questions, feel free to send me a WhatsApp.
Okay, Prof.
Right.
Good night.
Remember, problem statements are due by class time next week.
Okay, thank
And
you
can
very much.
upload those to Puja Blast.
Thank you very much, Prof.
All right.
Prof.
Have a good night. Assalamu alaikum. See you next week.
Thank you, Prof.
Good night, Prof.
Happy Iftar.
Good
Bye.
night.
Thank you,
Good night.
Prof.
Good
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good
Good
night.
night. Good night, Prof. Bye.